Catherine Ellis had been certain about one thing. Wyatt Brooks was a single father trying to find his way into her life, and money was the reason. He appeared at her daughter's school, then at the clinic, then at her fundraiser, and finally at the front desk of her company, always at exactly the right moment to fuel her suspicion. She warned him coldly to stop. But on the night Violet needed emergency surgery, and every account Catherine owned was frozen by an internal audit, Wyatt didn't argue. He didn't plead. He quietly sold the only truck he owned. The afternoon arrived the way late October always did in the city, gray-edged, cold enough to remind everyone that winter wasn't asking permission. The private elementary school on Alderton Street dismissed at 3 o'clock sharp, and by 3:15 the circular drive was backed up with black SUVs and European sedans. Security staff in dark jackets checked ID badges and wristbands. Into this world pulled a dark navy pickup truck with faded paint and a dented rear quarter panel. The engine knocked once when it shut off. Wyatt Brooks climbed out in a white button-down that had been ironed that morning but had since earned a crease across the left elbow from bending around loading dock corners. His jeans were clean. His work boots were not. He was 29, and built like someone who carried things for a living, broad through the shoulders, long-armed, with a jaw that hadn't seen a full shave in a few days. He moved without urgency, the way men do when they've learned that urgency rarely speeds anything up. Beside him, Luna pressed her stuffed rabbit against her chest and looked at the school the way a person looks at a building they don't think they're supposed to enter. He was there to drop a shipment of first aid inventory at the nurse's station, a routine delivery for a medical supply company he drove part-time for. He'd brought Luna because her school let out early on Wednesdays and the neighbor who usually watched her had a dentist appointment. The school had buzzed him in without incident. He was nearly back to his truck when the sound stopped him. It wasn't loud. It was the sound of a child trying not to make any noise while something was wrong. He turned and saw a girl near the front steps, 7 years old, small, her dress shoes planted unevenly on the bottom step, as if she'd caught herself mid-fall. One hand was pressed flat against her sternum. Her face had gone the color of skim milk. Other parents were moving. Some were pulling out phones. One woman in a wool coat shouted for the front desk to call an ambulance, which was not the worst idea, but also not the fastest one. Wyatt was already moving. He set his clipboard on the nearest bench, crouched beside the girl, and spoke quietly so she could hear him under all the noise. "Hey. Look right here. Just breathe with me. In and out. Nice and slow." The girl's name was Violet. She looked at him the way frightened children sometimes look at calm strangers, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to trust him, but didn't have the breath to argue. He didn't touch her. He kept his hands visible, asked a teacher to bring a glass of water, and gently guided her to sit rather than stand, which relieved some of the pressure on her chest. He'd seen this before, not exactly this, but close. He knew the shape of a child in respiratory distress, and he knew that a crowd leaning in wasn't helping. "Give her some room," he said, and because he said it with enough quiet authority, most people actually stepped back. Catherine Ellis arrived 4 minutes later. She'd been in a board call when the school texted 2 sentences, "Child unwell, please come," and she had left mid-sentence without apology. She was still in her work clothes, a black dress, heeled boots, a coat she hadn't fully buttoned. Her hair was dark chestnut and pulled back, and the expression on her face, when she spotted Violet, was the same expression any parent wears when they see their child on the ground, being helped by a stranger terror that has not yet decided whether to become gratitude. Rage. Jason Cole stepped ahead of her before she reached Wyatt. He was her personal driver and occasional security, a tall man who approached most situations as a problem to be contained. And right now the problem was a large man crouched beside the daughter of his employer. Wyatt straightened and moved back before Jason reached him. He raised both hands slightly, the universal language of, "I am not a threat," and said simply, "She had difficulty breathing. I kept her seated and calm. The school nurse has been called. She needs to be checked." Catherine was already past Jason, already dropping beside Violet, already pulling her into her arms in the fast, practiced way of a mother who has done this before and hated every time. Violet pressed her face into her mother's shoulder. Catherine looked up at Wyatt over the top of her daughter's head. She thanked him. The words were correct, but the tone was absent. Her eyes were already doing something else, scanning him, his truck, the clipboard he'd left on the bench, the little girl standing quietly nearby holding a stuffed rabbit. Violet said something against her mother's collar, and Catherine tilted her head to listen. "The man helped me," Violet murmured. Catherine nodded once and said, "I know, baby." But she didn't look at Wyatt again as she said it. He gathered his clipboard. He picked up his delivery receipt. He called Luna over, took her hand, and walked back through the gate without another word. Luna glanced back twice. Catherine was already on the phone with Violet's cardiologist, her voice crisp and controlled. The chauffeured SUV was pulling around, and Wyatt Brooks drove his dented Navy truck away from Alderton Street, not knowing, and not particularly caring whether the woman had thought well of him or poorly. Wyatt and Luna lived in a rental on the far side of the Claremont Warehouse District, a 2-bedroom house behind a chain-link fence, and a landlord who fixed exactly what the law required. The kitchen had a wooden table Wyatt had found at an estate sale and repaired himself. The chairs didn't match. The refrigerator had crayon drawings held up by takeout magnets, a blue truck, a man with a big smile, a rabbit with disproportionate ears. Every morning, Wyatt was up at 5. He made eggs or oatmeal, depending on what was in the pantry. He combed Luna's hair, checked her backpack, made sure the permission slips were signed, and the lunch was packed. Then he drove her to school on his way to his first route medical supply deliveries, mostly to clinics and outpatient facilities across the city. On slow days, he picked up handyman calls. On the slowest days, he moved furniture for cash. He was always home before dark. The truck was a 1993, dark navy, the kind of vehicle that wasn't worth much to anyone who looked at it from the outside. But Wyatt maintained it the way some people maintain a relationship, not because it was perfect, but because it mattered. His father had bought it used in the mid-90s, driven it until arthritis took away his grip, and handed Wyatt the keys the week Wyatt's wife died. "Take care of it," the old man had said, and Wyatt had understood he wasn't only talking about the truck. Under the front seat was a metal toolbox. On the rearview mirror before he'd removed it to keep it safe had been a small woven ornament Luna made in art class. The gas gauge tended to read lower than the actual level, which had trained Wyatt to fill up at 3/4 rather than wait for the warning light. He didn't talk much about his wife. Her name had been Claire, and she had died from a complication following a routine procedure when Luna was 14 months old. The window that closed 30 minutes too narrow, a system that moved too slowly, was something Wyatt had carried without unpacking for 6 years. What remained was a sensitivity to children near hospitals, a reflexive attention to breathing patterns, and an inability to stand still when a kid looked wrong. Luna noticed things. She was 6, but she thought the way some adults never quite manage. She noticed when her father's shoulders were set high, which meant he was worried. She noticed when the truck took the longer route home, which meant he didn't want the day to end yet. She noticed when he said everything was fine in the tone, that actually meant he had already figured out what to do and didn't want to scare her. That Wednesday night, she sat on the kitchen floor with her crayons, while Wyatt checked the delivery schedule on his phone and quietly recalculated whether the truck's repair could wait another 2 weeks. He decided it could. He'd decided the same thing 3 weeks before. Luna looked up and said, "If the truck breaks, do we have to move?" He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "We don't move. We figure it out." "How?" "Same way we always do. One thing at a time." She accepted this. She went back to her drawing. He looked at the truck through the kitchen window and thought about the repair quote he'd gotten that morning and what he'd have to sell to cover it, and how long he could hold on before that became unavoidable. Then he shelved all of that, set his phone face down, and asked Luna what she was drawing. She said it was a rabbit driving a spaceship. He said that sounded about right. Ellis Medical Systems occupied the 15th and 16th floors of a glass building on Creston Avenue. And if you wanted to understand Catherine Ellis, you could start with the view from her office city in every direction, a perspective that required distance to maintain. She had built the company from a licensing deal she'd secured at 24, a software platform for pediatric patient monitoring that she'd turned into a full-service operation through 7 years of brutal focus. She had a board that respected her and occasionally feared her. She had investors who called her a visionary and employees who called her demanding, and both groups were correct. She also had Violet, and Violet was the soft place inside the hard architecture of Catherine's life. The congenital heart condition Violet lived with was mild, manageable, monitored. The cardiologist used words like stable and consistent, and Catherine had trained herself to hear those words as sufficient. But every time Violet's breathing went wrong, every time there was an incident, a flag, a call from the school, That training dissolved in about 4 seconds. She had been burned before. The year after her divorce, when Violet was 4 and had her first notable episode, a man Catherine had considered a friend had held her hand through 2 frightening nights at the hospital, sent flowers, checked in daily, and then, 6 weeks later, asked her for an introduction to a venture group, because gratitude was a kind of currency if you knew when to spend it. She gave him the introduction. That transaction reconfigured her internal operating system permanently. She told Diana Ward this story once. Diana had listened and said, "Catherine, you're describing one bad person. You're making policy for everyone." Catherine had not found this helpful at the time. After the school incident, she asked Jason for a background summary on Wyatt Brooks. Jason delivered it the next afternoon. Single father, 1 child, wife deceased. Income from part-time delivery work and occasional handyman calls. Behind on rent 2 months in the past year. Truck due for significant repairs. No criminal record. No litigation history. No connection to media or financial services. He had a contract small, non-exclusive, with a logistics company that serviced several medical facilities in the city, including 2 that were part of Ellis Medical Systems supplier network. Catherine read this and felt something harden in her chest. The summary read like a setup. Man with nothing, appearing repeatedly in places where her daughter happened to be, providing just enough help to be memorable without asking for anything yet. She'd seen this structure before. Not from this man specifically, but from the type. Patient. Building proximity. Waiting for the moment when gratitude had accumulated enough weight to leverage. She told herself she was not being unfair. She was being experienced. In her office late that evening, she stood at the window with a glass of water she hadn't drunk and thought about Hunter Mills, her CFO, who had been flagging cash flow irregularities ahead of a major contract signing. An internal audit had been quietly opened. Several corporate accounts were in a verification, freeze, a normal precaution that would resolve in days. She was not worried about the audit. She was rarely worried about things she could control. A week after the school incident, Wyatt was scheduled to deliver a calibration kit to a pediatric outpatient clinic on the south side of the city. He brought Luna because her daycare had a staff meeting, and his backup option had fallen through. She sat in the waiting room with her rabbit and a small stack of picture books, completely uninterested in the adults moving around her. The clinic was part of a network affiliated with Ellis Medical Systems. Wyatt didn't know this when he accepted the delivery. He found out later. In the way you find out most things you wish you'd known sooner, too late for the information to help you avoid anything. Catherine was there for a systems review, walking the facility with the clinic director and 2 of her engineers. Violet was with her, tucked beside the building's administrative wing for a routine follow-up appointment with the on-site cardiologist. It was the kind of day where logistics and lives ran parallel tracks through the same building, without intersecting, until one of the doors that was supposed to stay open stuck shut. The electronic locking system in the administrative corridor experienced a minor electrical fault, a brownout that cycled the door controls. One fire door latched automatically, trapping Violet alone in a short hallway between the records room and the supply closet. The lights in the hallway dimmed and stuttered. A diagnostic alarm began chirping. Violet was 7 years old and alone in a narrow space with bad lighting and a heart condition that did not appreciate stress. Her voice was small when she called for her mother. Small in the way that children's voices get when they're trying not to fully panic and the effort is costing them. Wyatt heard it from the delivery entrance. He set down the calibration kit. He asked a passing nurse which way the hallway was, and he moved without running. Running created fear, and fear was not what Violet needed. He found the door, saw the manual release panel beside it, and used the flathead from his belt holster to engage the emergency bypass. The door opened in about 40 seconds. Violet stumbled out, caught herself on the wall, and then pressed her back against it and breathed in the careful way she'd been taught. He crouched to her level. He did not touch her. He said, "You did great. Just keep breathing like that." She looked at him. "You're Luna's dad," she said. "That's right." Catherine came around the corner 30 seconds later, at a pace that was technically a fast walk but was essentially a run. And the sound she made when she saw Violet standing upright in the hall, not the panicked sound, but the small, controlled exhale that follows it, was the sound of something that had almost happened, not happening. She pulled Violet into her arms and stood there for a moment, with her eyes closed. When she opened them, Wyatt was already standing, tool belt still in hand, taking a step back. She was trapped when the door faulted, he said. She's okay. Her breathing was good. Catherine thanked him again. This time there was genuine feeling behind it, brief and unguarded, and then the guard came back up. She offered to compensate him, and Wyatt said no. And the way he said it politely, with no particular emphasis, was somehow more irritating to her than if he'd argued. People who refused payment when they clearly needed it were either performing nobility or deferring the ask for later. She had seen both. I'd like to at least send something to Luna, she said. She's fine, Wyatt said. She's in the waiting room with a book about frogs. He picked up his clipboard and went back to his delivery. Catherine watched him go with the sense that something about the interaction had refused to follow its expected shape, and she didn't like how that felt. Jason, predictably, pointed out that Wyatt had now been present at 2 separate incidents involving Violet. Catherine said she was aware of that. I'm not saying he caused them, Jason said. I know what you're not saying, she replied. The fundraiser for the regional children's hospital system was held at the Caldwell Pavilion on a Thursday evening in November. It was catered, beautifully lit, full of people in evening wear writing checks for causes they'd learned to care about at their financial advisor's suggestion. Catherine attended as a sponsor and board advisor. She arrived with Violet, who had insisted on coming because she liked the chocolate fountain. Wyatt was there because a staging company had hired him to transport tables, audio equipment, and a pallet of branded gift bags from a warehouse to the event venue. He worked the back entrance while the donors worked the front. Luna sat in the staff area behind the kitchen, drawing pictures at a folding table, ignored by everyone and unbothered by this. Violet found her 20 minutes in. She crossed the staff threshold in a sequin dress, took one look at Luna bent over a drawing, and sat down on the other chair without being invited. They were friends by the time their respective parents became aware of the reunion. When the evening ended and volunteers were beginning to break down the floor, Violet came to give Luna a bracelet, a thin cord with a small turquoise bead, from a gift bag she'd been given.